about this. If you were that bully when you were a child, or I was a child, guess what? You grow up into that adulthood bully, and we've worked with them. I've worked with them.
So,
You don't. You
so,
never
so you're dealing with bullying in the workplace as well?
Of course.
Not just the school.
Which we tag what in our at our age? What do we call that? We don't call it bullying. We call it what?
Discrimination.
Harassment, right?
Yes.
Harassment. So at an adult level, we're harassed, we're victimized.
Okay.
You could still be victimized for being Lebanese. I could be victimized for being Italian. We could be discriminated for being gay, right? Or perhaps for having a disability. Or for being Lebanese. You're just not what we want, because we're a homogenized group of white people, Americans, and perhaps you're perceived as some, ethnic foreigner.
Yeah. You're a small organization. You're 1 year old.
Yes.
You've got national reach, or you're developing national reach. But how much of a debt do you think you can really have in this problem? You have written a couple of books that are available on Amazon or Barnes & Noble. Stop Bullying Me. This is for children.
This is for children K-8, yeah.
So it's kind of a workbook for them?
Well, it's an understanding that
you
parents
use?
can read, and why this book is so important is that it really helps children with hidden disabilities like autism and Asperger's understand what bullying is in a very simplistic nature. The parents can work one-on-one, or the guidance counselor principal can.
So it's intended not just for the child, but
really
for an adult.
Correct.
To engage in conversation.
Absolutely, that's right.
And this is the same?
This is more of a working book called Teach Anti-Bullying, and this one was developed for parents and teachers to really kind of break down what bullying is, how to, on a very generic level, understand how to work with it, and again, for children in the K-8 environment.
And this is the cover.
This is the cover
of the newest book.
This is now a international bestseller called Amazing Grades, and myself and 101 other authors came together with Pat Wyman, who is an educator from HowToLearn.com in California, and I wrote the chapter on how bullying affects academic achievement, which is really a direct correlation of when children are victimized. The first sign is looking at their grades.
It seems to me, and this is an interest of mine, Doctor, I teach a course in managing the multi-generational workforce. So now we have multi-generational bullying.
Correct.
Both ways.
Right.
The millennials going up and I guess the boomers coming down.
That's correct.
Yeah. You deal with that as well?
We deal with that as well. And again, you look at delusion of grandeur. We've dealt with that. You've dealt with that. But it is cross-sectional, cross-cultural, cross-gender.
Well, we're becoming a much more pluralistic society.
Right.
With the increase of the Hispanic community, the Asian community, all of which, if done right, enriches us and makes us a better society.
That's right.
But I guess we do go through periods of this bullying or antagonism and so on until we get over this issue of difference.
The problem is that we can change behavior. We know that. We can modify behavior.
Permanently?
We can modify behavior, sure.
Right.
We cannot change attitude. If people,
but attitude precedes behavior.
Well, but behavior, if a child perhaps has a behavioral issue, we can modify that. So there's we can do that in our schools.
Yes.
And what's hard about that if we don't get the parental support at home.
Yes.
But the problem is if your father, your grandfather say that you should not like African Americans or you should not like gays, you are going to teach your children and your great-grand. So that's kind of where my issue is. That's the attitudinal infrastructure that will never change if people don't tend to say, we're all, as President Obama says, we're all created equal. The Constitution says that. The Gettysburg Address said that.
But he wasn't the first one to say it.
He wasn't the first one.
He may take credit for it. But
and certainly Dr. Martin Luther King said it. So the problem is that
Christ said it somewhere along the line. Christ.
Well, but again, that's from a Christian Catholicism standpoint, and again, you're going to all these factional groups are going to say, well, I don't support it. If I don't like you because you're African American or you're gay, I'm never going to like you. And there's your issue of ethnic and racial bullying. How do you stop that?
It goes back to the family. It always goes back to the family unit. And the disintegration of the family unit.
That's correct.
For all the reasons we all talked about.
That's correct.
Single parents,
divorce,
households where both parents work,
current
divorce,
income,
etc.
Our current economic structure.
Yeah. Now, how do we reverse that? We're never going to go back to what we. Never going to go back to what we were. Never.
But whether it's diabetes, autism,
Yes.
or cancer awareness, we need the awareness. And the awareness piece is critical to truly understanding what bullying is and what it is not, and getting our parents involved in a school. One of the three areas that the school administrators, from the superintendent down, from the school board down, in the United States, is lack of parental involvement in our schools. That's across our
Well,
nation.
we've been saying that for years.
But why do you think that is? Why don't parents come back to school? Why don't they come back to school night? They don't get involved. What do you think the reasoning is?
Tell me.
Because they were victims of their own ethnic, racial type of ostracism. They were bullied themselves. They were suspended. They feel that they didn't get any justice then, and they're not going to get any. They're just going to be basically politicians. They're going to come in, and we're going to talk about, and nothing will get done. So they figure, what's the point?
I'm not sure I agree with you. I think
Well, that's
parents,
okay. We can agree to disagree.
sure, and that's good.
Yeah.
I think it's more that parents are intimidated by their children these days.
Well, they're intimidated by what they don't know. Because if you're not an educator,
Yes.
and you come in to sit in front of the principal, the superintendent,
Right.
and you're given this lingo, just like if a lawyer is talking to you in his own language, they don't know what you're saying, especially if they have children with special needs and they're not really knowledgeable of an
with that.
IEP or 504.
I
So
agree with
parents are not going to, there's the intimidation. So in
Yes.
most cases, they need an advocate to interpret what you're actually saying to me. You know.
I think that's part of it, but I go back to what I said originally. I think parents, many parents, are intimidated by their children.
Okay?
Because their children are being empowered now by social media,
Right.
by a school system,
Right?
by a culture
Correct.
that says you're special. There is no winning or losing.
Right.
Everybody wins.
Sure.
You know, you've heard this all,
Sure.
and you know it better than I do. But there's a kind of egalitarianism that's settled into our culture, and it's not good. So that yes, we are all equal in the eyes of God.
Right.
But that doesn't mean equal outcomes.
That's right.
It means equal opportunity.
That's right.
Well, we're being taught that outcomes, or somebody's being taught, that outcomes are more important than opportunity.
Well, you just mentioned a great operative word, the outcomes.
Yeah.
The outcomes, and right now with the No Child Left Behind mandate that George Bush left us with, everything's an outcome. Everything is about accountability. Teachers and principals and superintendents, they're under a great deal of pressure to get from A to B. And a lot of the stuff in the middle, like bullying prevention, it's not that they don't want to get involved and are aware of it. They don't have the time in the day to address every issue that's suspected to be bullying or violence in nature.
And that's because of the No Child Left Behind.
Well, I think that's part of the pressure, the overwhelming pressure to make what we call AYP, to make that annual yearly progress, to hold the schools and school districts accountable.
You're not suggesting they shouldn't be held accountable.
I think they should be, but there's a lot in the law itself that makes it overwhelming to get for a certain area to a benchmark. You talk about the outcome, and there's also the other piece of it, and this is from the top down, is budgetary constraints. They want to do these types of programs, but the question is, who's going to pay for it? One of our local representatives of Westchester, Dan Truitt, is...
But all of that suggests that the responsibility should be relegated to the schools.
Correct.
I think we're both saying
Absolutely.
it starts with and should start with and should be the primary responsibility of the parents.
Starts at home,
Yeah,
cooperation with the parents.
in cooperation
and
with
school,
the school.
with the school,
Right, right.
correct.
But not to relegate primary responsibility to the education system. That should be a default.
Well, and again, there's a time constraint on how much the school can do in the course
I'm
of the
agreeing
day.
with that. Therefore,
Correct.
to the
Back to
primary
organizations that come
responsibility
in.
to the parents.
Right, correct.
Okay. Your greatest concern about bullying is
suicide.
Suicide.
Yeah, I mean, right now, suicide in the United States among teens, 13 to 18, is at 4,300 a year. We've lost 362 children since Columbine to assisted suicides, and 4,300 roughly a year. It is the third leading cause of death. That's the Center for Disease Control. And in part, many of them have been victims of some form of cyberbullying in nature.
And do you see this increasing?
No, it has increased over the
I know
past
it
10
has,
years.
but do you see it continuing to increase?
Of course. And again, it's no fault of anybody. I mean, you can point a finger at the parents, at the schools, at whomever, but we cannot finger point anymore. We have to collaboratively come together to do three things. I tell kids all the time, I tell parents, kids have to come to school feeling good about who they are intrinsically.
I agree.
Okay, number one, they have to feel safe. which we just know. You know what happened at Sandy Hook.
Yes.
You know, and thirdly, they have to get the best possible education that our teachers have to offer them.
Well, wait a minute, though. Excuse me. Sandy Hook was safe.
Correct. You would think.
And those kids apparently came from a almost storytelling community,
Right.
idyllic from all descriptions. Good families, good community, good social structure, etc. People were helpful to one another. The old-fashioned, small town. So the community was good, the culture was good, the values were good, the school was safe, and in spite of all of that, we had this horrific incident by apparently a deranged young man. Was he bullied? I don't know.
No, and you know, again, you know, there's been a lot of suspect. You know, Sandy Hook was not something. You know, that wasn't like, well, that was a bullying-related incident. I mean, people pointed whether the child, you know, the young man had Asperger's, whether there was some level of mental illness. The bottom line is, they can dissect and do autopsies all they want. The incident happened. He wasn't even from the community, but it just goes to show that. Let's back to 2011. In the United States, we've had 336 school shootings since the first one took place in Texas massacre in Texas, University of Texas in '66. The first high school shooting in '74.
Were the shooters youngsters, or were they?
Well, that was the first school shooting on a college campus. At a high school level in New York. And High Point, New York, was the first high school shooting in 1974. We've had 366 in the United States. And since 2005, when bullying really came to the surface as a tagline, we've had 110 bullying-related suicides, where I've told you the statistic from the Center for Disease Control is 87% of our young people say there's no real reason for us to talk about it anymore. I've talked to you, I've talked to the principal, and they basically resort to the lethal school violence type of, and then it happened at Columbine. Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, and it happened at Virginia Tech with Chung Soy-Hu. And Michael Carney in Paducah, Kentucky. They were all victims. They were victims because they were taunted and abused because they were gay and they were gothic in nature. And they were, you know, Chung Soy-Hu, who was ethnic like you and I, he was from Korea. And since middle school, he was taunted because he didn't speak English very well. So he took out 32 people. You know, Columbine, 13. Paducah, Kentucky, 3. I mean, and again, it just happened last week. It happens, and it's going to continue to happen until we have safeguards. And again, Rick, post 9/11, what did our country do? We developed what?
The Homeland Security.
Homeland Security. We take our shoes off. We go on a plane. I got to take my belt off. Somebody can come into any school today, for the most part, right?
Then we reached the point where we said, or some people said, Homeland Security is infringing on my individual rights. So now we have to make a decision to trade off individual rights for the good of and security of our culture, our society. Well, I think we've only scratched the surface of this, and the control room is telling me I've got to wind it up. I really appreciate you being here. It's a powerful, powerful message. And if anyone is interested for more information or to engage you in a program, they can go to
www.teachantabullying.com.
Teachantabullying.com. Thank you very much
for being here. Thank you for having me. Appreciate your time.
We'll have you back.
Thank you.
When you have more to